All right. Thank you, Lindy. Well, excellent. So I would like to welcome everybody to the ngEHT November meeting from Vision to Instrument. And we will kick this off with an introduction welcome from Rob Myers, who's director of Perimeter Institute, string theorist extraordinaire, and expert on black holes in 4 and more dimensions. So Rob, I think we're seeing your presenter view this time.
Dear, I got the wrong one. Okay, just a second. Let me try again. Is that working better?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so it's a pleasure to be introducing or kicking off the meeting. As Avery said, I'm the director here at the Perimeter Institute, and I'm a string theorist. And so I've actually been playing with black holes or thinking about black holes, talking about black holes through my entire career as a theoretical physicist. But I was reflecting on it last night, and I think that my introduction to black holes actually started here. Let me try that again. It started here. You know, black holes have often been the fodder of science fiction tales and, you know, movies. And I really think that that's where, as a high school student, I got my first introductions into this idea. But on reflecting upon it last night, I really realized, you know, the idea of a black hole has really captured the popular imagination, and you see it popping up in many different ways. I selected, well, I could have selected any one of hundreds of cartoons that I found on the web last night. I picked one here in the upper left because that's closer to home. But I think just about every political budget has been described as a black hole, according to Google. And I really like the one on the bottom there, on the bottom right, because as a string theorist, it hints at the loss of information that black holes have created. Of course, the EHT and the image it produced 2 years ago really brought home the idea of how black holes have captured the popular imagination. I mean, this is an image that appeared on the front page of just about every newspaper, perhaps every major newspaper around the world. It's an image that, you know, I'm told half of humanity has actually seen that image. And so it really speaks to black holes as not just a fascinating playground for scientists, but it's something that has really touched humanity and made us reflect on our place in the universe. Of course, this week's meeting is about science. And I have to say, though, as a string theorist, as Avery said, my view of black holes is probably different than most people's view here. Here's a favorite quote of mine, where Chandrasekhar describes black holes as the most perfect macroscopic objects there are in the universe. The only elements in their construction are the concepts of space and time. So the ideas, the problems that I think about are probably very different than the problems that you think about in your day-to-day. In particular, they're focused here on this image and Hawking's discovery that when we take quantum mechanics into account, the black holes actually leak. But that idea and trying to resolve the consequences of that idea have really driven a lot of the developments in my area of string theory and theoretical physics for decades now. And it's produced many surprises like holography or the ADS-CFT. But at its core, we were really driving towards understanding black holes at a theoretical level. Now, the black holes that you're thinking about, are somewhat more messy than the pristine objects that I commonly think about. And I was really struck by going over the schedule for this week's meeting and actually the meeting last January. You know, there's the physics of jets, of accretion disks, magnetic fields, extending all the way to the role of black holes in cosmology, and perhaps testing fundamental physics, you know, whether that be testing Einstein's theory of general relativity or discovering new light fundamental fields to be part of nature and the universe. But it really brings home for me the idea that this image was really just a stepping stone in a research program that's going to stretch out for years and decades to come with the next generation EHT. And so I just thank you all for participating in the meeting here today, and I wish you the greatest success for a stimulating and successful meeting and for an exciting years to come with the ngEHT EHT project as it unfolds. I'll certainly be sitting on the sidelines as Homer is here and watching with both awe and envy with all the work that you're going to be doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Rob, for an inspiring opening to the meeting. I hope we live up to it. At some point, we may not approach the string scale, but you never know what we will find under the horizon. All right, so with that, I think we're going to jump into the first logistical presentation of the meeting, which I have the honor of giving. So let me share my screen. And move into present mode. Okay, so I was going to say a little bit about the meeting itself, the logistics, and what brings us all here this week. And it's much of the scientific wonder that Rob described, but also the name of this meeting, I think, telegraphs its purpose from vision to instrument, making a lot of that a reality. Of course, the most exciting thing about this meeting is all of your participation. The ngEHT is truly a global endeavor. We have participants from 6 of 7 continents, and we have a telescope into Antarctica. We have a telescope on the 7th. So this is truly a world-spanning endeavor. And we welcome all of you. It also spans a wide range of career stages. So the old guard or the original generation or any other version of OG you prefer composes less than a half of the participants. Less than half of the participants in this meeting, the rest being comprised by junior members, people who do not have permanent positions, and will be moving into leadership positions as this project unfolds over the next decade. So by the numbers, there are nearly 500,000 registrants to this meeting. We cover 20 different time zones. There are 37 plenary talks, 65 contributed talks, 10 contributed posters. The beating heart of this meeting will be 3 interactive sessions, which I encourage everyone to attend. I see somebody is marking up the screen. Lindy, could I get you to clear that and turn that up? Right. So Lindy, I'll get you to take care of that. Thank you. 3 interactive sessions in which we will attempt to make good on moving from vision to instrument. 1 outreach panel, 1 documentary, and arranged especially for everyone here, 1 US decadal review. course, a meeting like this does not happen by accident. This has been a consequence of a lot of hard work by a number of different groups of people. The first that I'd like to highlight is the Scientific Organizing Committee. This is comprised of researchers around the world, including Meg Urey, Ingrid Stairs, Eva Silverstein, Remo Talanis, Liz Humphreys, Neil Nagar, Cliff Will, Rob Salina, Carrie Hayworth, Lindy Blackburn, Ilya Mandel, Paul Ho, Jiquan Shen, Jose Gomez, Monica Moskobrodska, Garret Fitzpatrick, Shep Doeleman, Michael Johnson, and myself. And equally, if not more important, the local organizing committee responsible for actually making this meeting run. And that's composed of Angelo Ricarte, Razia Maibadi, Yolan Price, Venki Ramakrishnan, Sandra Bustamante, Kataro Moriyama, Talia Trianu, Rusen Liu, Guangyao Zhao, Richard Anantua, and chaired by Lindy Blackburn. If you have any questions or concerns about the operation of the meeting, I encourage you to contact the LOC or members of the SOC, or of course you can contact myself and Michael Johnson. This is a global community, and that comes with it both great aspiration, but also substantial challenge. Convening a global community, especially in the current circumstances the world finds itself in, is difficult. And maintaining the interactive element of a meeting is a substantial challenge. We do request that you ask questions. We want to maintain as much interactivity as possible. And so if questions arise during presentations, please do utilize the very best Zoom etiquette and maintain muted until called upon. But use the raise hand feature and the chair of the session will recognize you, at which point you unmute and may ask your question. If you don't want to ask the question verbally, feel free to utilize the Zoom chat to place your question there. It'll be addressed at the end of the presentation. But if you have more substantial discussions or off-topic discussions, both of which are encouraged, please move those to the Slack channel. So a Slack channel has been, or Slack space has been created specifically for this meeting. You should have received information in your email, invitation email on how to join that Slack channel space. If you haven't, you can contact the local organizing committee and they can forward the appropriate information to you. Each session and day has a channel. It's most convenient if you organize your conversations by when they happen. And this Slack space will be preserved so that it will be a resource in the future for you to look back upon and review. One very important channel in the meeting Slack space is the general channel. This is where the primary vector for communicating logistical information about the meeting to the meeting participants. So all of you here have successfully found the Zoom link for the meeting. But if you forget where that is, the Slack general space or general channel will be the first place to look. Links to the block schedule, which we will discuss in just a moment. You can find that links on the Slack channel and on the ngEHT website. A participants guide with instructions for chairs, speakers, but also a code of conduct. We do want this to be a collegial meeting and everybody, engaging in the best example of academic engagement. So please do take a moment to go look through the participants guide. And finally, a file drop location to submit slides to preserve them for posterity, and perhaps even more important, submit a headshot. On these distributed meetings, we don't get to congregate for a conference photo anymore, but what we can do is collect photos individually and glue them into a single conference photo, and we have done that in every meeting that we've held. So please do submit that headshot. It doesn't have to be a professional shot. It can be just a picture on Zoom. but look for instructions on the general Slack channel for how to do that. Plenary and parallel talk sessions are recorded. This is critical to facilitate our many time zones. I saw in the chat that some people are attending at 3 a.m., which is amazing, and we thank you for doing that. We don't want to keep everyone up all hours of the day, so you will be able to, within 24 hours of the talks being given, see them online. But these links are unlisted. Please do not share the link. You'll be able to find it on that general Slack channel. Following the meeting, we will attempt to secure permission to put these in public links, at which point they will appear on the ngEHT YouTube channel. You'll be able to view them during the meeting. And for those speakers who wish to have their presentation made public, we will secure the appropriate permissions following the meeting. So this meeting is the second in a series of ngEHT meetings. Rob mentioned the Science at the Horizon meeting held in February, in which we really discussed all of the varied science cases and attempted to brainstorm the most exciting science cases that we could imagine at that time. The culmination of that meeting was the creation of 8 science working groups with topics ranging from fundamental physics all the way to the history and philosophy and culture of the ngEHT. And here are photos of those scientists who graciously have lent their time and expertise to leading those working groups, and we will hear more from them today. This meeting follows on that and attempts to make a critical transition from the scientific vision to an actual piece of hardware, to an actual tangible instrument. I think the most important line in the description of this meeting is that together we will define the primary science goals and begin the process of making ngEHT design choices. And that's what this meeting has really been built around. So what the schedule looks like currently is shown here. The schedule might actually be a couple hours out of date, so I encourage you to look at the most recent schedule. You can find that on the Slack general channel. You can find that on the ngEHT meeting website. Please make sure your Zoom installations are up to date so that nobody misses any of the exciting scientific and technical discussions and presentations fighting with their local telecommunication solutions. And if you have challenges with that, again, you can contact the local organizing committee. Just to look at what's happening today, to slowly ease into it, following this presentation, we will hear from Shep Doeleman and Garret Fitzpatrick on the vision of the ngEHT and its design challenges. After a short coffee break, we will begin to hear the output of the work since the February meeting by those science working groups. Each of those science working groups will give us a short presentation on their most exciting science drivers and what they think may be necessary to achieve them. This is separated into 2 groups, and in between the 2, we will hear a breakfast, lunch, or dinner talk, depending upon your time zone, by Changpei Ma on the largest black holes in the universe. Following the science working group reports, we will hear about challenges in astronomical inference from Torsten Ensslin. And we will hear from Jose Gomez, Vikram Ravi, and Guillermo Blanc on possible new sites for ngEHT stations where we might place additional telescopes. And last but not least today, we have an opportunity to interact in an informal setting. One of the things that's missed in a lot of these Zoom meetings these days is an opportunity to run into each other in the hall, have a side conversation, or go out for a drink and get to know each other outside of the scientific context. And this last session, organized by the local organizing committee, is a social event aimed around fun and games, get to know the other participants in the project on a personal level, and maybe build in a little bit of that in-person flavor to the meeting. Looking past today, we have our parallel sessions, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Each of these have 3 parallel sessions running on topics ranging from resolving jet structures and kinematics all the way to the instrument and outreach. Okay, so there's a tremendous variety of science and presentations being and technical topics being discussed in these parallel sessions. They will be operated as Zoom breakout rooms, which again, sometimes can be finicky with the older Zoom versions. So please make sure your Zoom installation is up to date to fully make use of those. As I said before, the beating heart is the interactive sessions in which we discuss metrics and array architecture, what we've called in the past the Lego blocks exercises. Again, this will be making use of the breakout rooms in Zoom. Garrett will tell us more about this in just a little bit. And following the end of the presentations of each day are various informal interactions. The one today centered around social events and fun, but there's also a junior fireside chat, poster lightning talks and poster session, and software tutorials, all with perhaps a little bit less formality than the rest of the conference. And I encourage people to participate in those as possible. A few other items to highlight. We have 2 presentations on how to ethically partner with local populations, one by Jess Dempsey and the other by Larry Kimura, who will talk about his experience bringing astronomy to Native Hawaiians and building a language around astronomy in Native Hawaiian. We have a panel discussing how to connect to a broader audience. Rob described how the EHT's first image reached an audience well beyond the scientific, really became part of the human story. A piece of that is how science is popularized and presented to the public at large. And we have some of the stars of the YouTube science community and our very own Richard Anantua, outreach coordinator for the EHT, here to tell us about their experiences with doing that. Peter Gallison will regale us with his documentary on Chandrasekhar, Shattered Stars, and an associated panel discussion. I believe that's fantastic. And of course, it was very difficult, but nevertheless, we managed to schedule the US Decadal review right in the middle of our meeting. Many of you may know that ngEHT did submit a white paper to this. We look forward to hearing how they felt about that and hope, of course, that the ngEHT figures prominently. That's happening in November in the last session. So finally, I want to close this presentation on objectives and logistics with the call to action. Here's that one quoted line from the meeting presentation. And I encourage people as they go through this meeting to think of 3 questions. What is the most exciting science drivers that you're hearing? What gets you up in the morning to work on ngEHT, or what would get you up in the morning to work on ngEHT? What is really necessary to achieving that science case? Do we need better dynamic range? Do we need more resolution? Do we need better frequency coverage? What is the critical advance that's required? And finally, and this is where things get hard and what defines the crucible in which the ngEHT is ultimately fashioned, what might we forego? What is it that we might leave on the drawing board so that we can pursue the most exciting science in a fashion that recognizes, limited resources, limited time, personnel, and most importantly, inevitable cost caps. So with that, I think I will now open the floor to Shep Doeleman, who will give us a vision of the ngEHT, what it really looks like in its current instantiation. So welcome and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Avery. So my sacred duty at this point is to kick things off a little bit and describe what our collective vision is for the ngEHT. And it's a pleasure to do that. In some sense, it's a little bit of an easy job because I think from the last meeting, we understand already what the vision is. We'd like to do something that's transformative, that takes the precision measurement of black hole event horizons to the next level. On the right, you see some of the stations we connected by purple baselines where they currently exist and blue where we might put them in the future. We know somehow this is all built on these wonderful results that Rob showed us earlier. You see this bright ring of emission around M87. Contained within that ring is 6.5 billion solar masses. What an astounding thing that that much mass is within the orbit of photons around that very object. It is the best evidence for the existence of supermassive black holes that I know of. But the human palate and intellect gets sophisticated pretty quickly. So after 20 years of complaining we didn't see a black hole, it only took a few seconds before we were complaining it was too blurry. So what are we going to do to fix this? Well, we know that there are some problems here because if you look on the left, you'll see a simulated jet for M87. And you can see that if you want to study jet or energy extraction from this black hole, you need to look at this low surface brightness jet going off to the right. And the ngEHT 2017 simply cannot make that kind of image. We don't have the imaging fidelity to do that. Partially this is because we don't have short baselines. The shortest baseline in the ngEHT corresponds to about 200 microarc seconds. So we can't see that beautiful jet that we know goes off to milliarc seconds. And we need high dynamic range. We also know that if we're going to make movies of Sagittarius A star, we have to up our game in the snapshot mode department. So GM over C cubed for Sagittarius A star is a mere 20 seconds. And the orbital period for matter around the black hole for a Schwarzschild black hole is 30 minutes, but it ranges from 4 minutes to 1 hour if the black hole is spinning. So we have to subsample that ISCO period and make images with enough coverage, UV coverage or Fourier spatial frequency coverage to do that in short periods of time. And then there's the idea of how we test Einstein's theory. If you look at the upper left here, you'll see a general relativistic magnetohydrodynamic simulation of a black hole. The white dashed line shows very clearly where the photon orbit is. But if you translate that down to the image we actually made, and then in black, we trace the ridge line, the brightest ridge around that, we see there's a bias. And so normally we would think our measured angular shadow diameter would be some wonderful number, 2 times the square root of 27 times the angular gravitational radius. But in fact, we know that we have to fit for that. And we have a fudge factor alpha, and we empirically find out what that offset, that bias is by using hundreds of GRMHD simulations, running them through our imaging pipeline and comparing the ridge of the bright ring to where we know the photon ring should exist in those simulations. And in doing so, we have a floor, a 10% uncertainty floor that we just can't get beyond at present. So how can we get beyond that fundamental limit on how well we can test GR? And the answer, I would claim, and I think we're all here to discuss, lies in putting a number of smaller apertures around the globe, shown here in the potential red spots at high altitude locations around the globe, compared with the blue areas where we already have telescopes. We would expand the bandwidth by a factor of 4, and we would extend our observing frequency from 1.3 millimeter to 0.87, recording both simultaneously, allowing us an immediate realization of a 50% increase in angular resolution. And on the right, you can see all the sampling of the Fourier spatial frequencies in gray and black. This is what we can do currently. But if we could add a number of dishes around the globe, we essentially fill this virtual aperture and make very high fidelity images. So this seems to be the key. Now, what's happened since our last meeting? And the reason I'm optimistic and the reason I'm as excited as ever about this project is that a number of things are falling into place. And first, science working groups have been convened. These are international groups led by experts in their fields. And we're getting the best and the brightest really to think broadly and expansively about what we can do with this new instrument. Avery, Broderick, and Michael Johnson have really led this effort, and hats off to them for doing all the hard work of getting these groups together. They're tasked with coordinating development of all the science requirements, use cases, and ultimately the science book, which will be the sacred receptacle for our highly prioritized science. And I'm going to go through very briefly just some of the topics that are being discussed now in these groups. So on the fundamental physics front, it's possible that we can start to make precision measurements of spin, engage in space-time tomography, sensing the Kerr metric around the black hole. We can look for fundamental fields, set limits on ultralight fields like axions, and we can quantify physics at the horizon. And very interestingly, we may be able to cut through that 10% uncertainty on our testing of GR by not looking at the lightly lensed n=0 ring, which is when photons graze the event horizon, but also looking at the n=1 ring, which constitute photons that make a full U-turn around the black hole. These hold much more closely to the space-time metric. And being able to fit the n=1 ring could be the next step for GR testing. And then with black holes in their cosmic context, which is the second working group, they're focusing on black holes across cosmic time. How do black holes grow? Are there binary black holes that we could hope to measure? And how do we connect AGN radio loudness with the activity around the central black hole, as well as multi-wavelength studies? Dom Pesci and his collaborators have looked specifically at the question of how many shadows we might be able to see. And given the sensitivity on the y-axis and the angular resolution on the x-axis, we estimate that we could see as many as 10 sources with the ngEHT, which raises exciting possibilities for demographics, or as Michael Johnson has called it, holographics. On the jet launching and accretion front, we have a number of motivating questions. These are only the ones that I have heard about that the working group is dealing with. Are jets powered by gravitational energy, or are they launched through black hole spin energy? What are the physical conditions at the foot point of the M87 jet? And then what physics is really important on mid-range scales and micro scales in the turbulent flow? And what are the boundary conditions, both the inner and outer, on the black hole accretion flow? And these will be answered by the astounding possibilities for movie making of large-scale jets. So here you see on the left a model showing how the black hole is feeding energy and matter into this jet. And on the right is what we think we can do with existing algorithms by combining 230 and 345 gigahertz observations with a next generation EHT instrument. So the prospects seem very, very bright indeed. We also convened was a transients working group, which is exploring how we might train the next generation instrument on X-ray binaries, tidal disruption events, supernova, even gravitational wave precursors and afterglows, looking at gamma ray bursts, for example. And on the right, you see an X-ray binary light curve, which says that we need to be able to swivel all of our telescopes in very short order, a matter of minutes or hours, to capture these kinds of transients. So this would set important requirements on how we trigger and operate the ngEHT. And then we realized that there was a whole raft of science that was not siloed into any one particular working group, and we grouped them all into the New Horizons working group. And it turns out this is one of the most exciting and oversubscribed groups that we have. They're looking at everything from mega maser cosmology to stellar silicon monoxide, masers around evolved and young stars, different multi-wavelength synergies, even looking at magnetars. So I personally am really looking forward to hearing some of the prioritized science that comes out of this group. The difficulty, of course, will be to set the priorities. And the last two working groups that we've convened is our algorithms and inference. And these are the people and the group that is tasked with looking at the fundamental algorithms that will make the ngEHT work, that will allow us to extract the science. As I like to say, the EHT really was partly a simulation and algorithmic telescope. We could not have pulled out that image if we had not had state-of-the-art algorithms. People there are looking at static imaging, dynamical imaging, 3D modeling of the accretion flow, astrophysical simulations, and so forth. And I want to call everyone's attention to the fact that we have launched an analysis challenge. Just as the EHT had an imaging challenge in which we tested our imaging algorithms, now we're looking at analysis challenges in which we can fit n=1 rings, we can make movies and compare our results. There will be a talk by Freek Roelofs, and he and Lindy Blackburn are leading this tomorrow, and please do visit this website for more details. And then importantly, we made a decision at the outset to incorporate history, philosophy, and culture into the ngEHT. It's absolutely critical, as Avery mentioned, that we take culture into our siting decisions, that we understand going in how large collaborations operate, that we embrace the foundational philosophical questions raised by black holes like space-time stability, thermodynamics, and causality, and understand the history and the philosophy of imaging when we think about new algorithms. It's a wonderful thing that many of us are now working with philosophers and historians, and our science is the richer for it. So in addition to the science working groups, we also launched technical working groups, a very important part of getting this vision to be reality. These are also focused international groups. We have experienced co-leads, and Garrett Fitzpatrick, our project engineer, Kari Harworth, the chief technology officer at SAO, and Jonathan Weintraub, our technical consigliere, were really responsible for gelling and convening these. They're going to develop recommendations for all of our subsystems, looking in their crystal balls for technology trends and carrying out trade studies and surveying all of the efforts ongoing around the globe. And this ensures that we're going to have input from major stakeholders. We do not want to leave anyone out. Everyone is welcome, and we want the best ideas. And this will allow us to have contributions for key systems from global expert teams. So nothing is set in stone. And if a group wants to come with a whole subsystem, that would be fantastic for such an in-kind contribution. So in this area, we have convened a digital backend working group, and they're looking at the absolute latest in analog to digital chips and protocols. This is led by Jonathan Weintraub at SAO and Alan Roy from the Max Planck Institute. And they're also looking at high-speed recorders using commercial off-the-shelf components. You can see some workers at SAO running some tests on the latest incarnation of that backend. Gopal Narayanan at SAO, at UMass, and Ray Blundell at SAO are leading the ngEHT receiver working group, convening, as I said, experts from around the globe. They're looking at dual band, 230, 345 gigahertz design that include dichroics and mixers of the latest design. Their goal is to maximize bandwidth and thereby sensitivity of the ngEHT. And they're also thinking very carefully about whether we can add 86 gigahertz to the ngEHT. There are a host of scientific reasons to do so. Jets, the emission around black holes really start at lower frequencies. We observe them with the EHT at higher frequencies. Do we want to include a lower frequency in the receiver suite for the ngEHT? And there'll be a talk by Sarah Issaoun, who's leading a task force along with Dom Pesce and Freek Roelofs on whether or not we can do this. The data management working group is tackling a monumental challenge. How do you correlate and process 60 petabytes of data from one campaign and then turn it around in a week or two so that we can make time-lapse video of M87? We have to think expansively and out of the box on correlation. Will we do it on a cluster? Will we go into the cloud where we can nimbly assemble millions of cores in an instant or close to an instant? How will we transport our data? Are we shipping disks as we have before? Or are we doing e-transfer? And how do we calibrate our data? On the upper right here, you'll see some of the first EHT detections processed on the cloud, courtesy of Greg Lindell. This is being led by Lindy Blackburn at SAO and Mark Ketnes from the Joint Institute for VLBI in Europe. And site selection does not yet have a working group per se, but it is being helmed at present by Alex Raymond at SAO, who's done a huge amount of work collating historical weather and opacities to find out where around the globe we'd like to put our new dishes and optimizing antenna placement. And he's even leading some in situ measurements at multiple sites using new water vapor radiometers, using a design of his own innovation. And on the right, you can see that as we add new stations, you can plot the capability of those new stations using different metrics. On the y-axis is the RMS side lobe ratio, measure of image fidelity, and the incremental UV filling factor on the x-axis. And you can see that each number of telescopes defines a cloud, and you can look and see how your capability increases as you add more dishes, but that there are many ways in which you can get very good sensitivity, very good imaging with fewer dishes in some cases, if you place the telescopes at just the right places on the Earth. So it's a very interesting optimization problem that's ongoing. Now, as Avery said, we have no idea what's coming on Thursday. And I am waiting on tenterhooks like everybody else. We have an Astro 2020 white paper that's been submitted in 2019. I like our chances. I will say that I was asked for permission for them to use the ngEHT M87 image in the report. I don't know if it's going to be in there for sure, but I hope that it will be. And you can see that the ngEHT does occupy a very interesting region of parameter space. You can see here all the next generation instruments. This is an image put together and adapted by Michael Johnson. And you can see that the ngEHT plays in a very rarefied, unique space where it continues on in terms of angular resolution and frequency from existing sites or planned sites at lower frequencies, but dips below this very important black hole shadow line. And that's where the gold is. And so the ngEHT is almost alone in being able to do that. And we will know on Thursday. I will note that in 2010, we also put in an ngEHT white paper, and mention of the ngEHT appeared nowhere in the Astro 2010 report. And so I hope that that will not happen again this year. The last structural thing we've put in place, I'm very happy to report that we've had our first meeting of the Project Advisory Committee for the ngEHT. I'm not going to go through all these names, but many will be known to you. And on October 12th, we presented the entire design to them, and they will be coming with a report soon, which will come to us, but also to our funders. And we're looking forward very much to their advice on our science objectives, technical developments, even cost models, schedule. These are people with wealth of experience in building large collaborations and also very large instruments. So having this external advisory committee will be a very important part of strategizing on how we move forward. So in summary, the international work on ngEHT science specifications is underway. You are all proof of that, the very fact that we are here. I see, oops, I'm trying to find out how many people we have. We have 228 participants right now, which is really kind of exceptional. Wait, I've lost my my window. Okay, I'm going to try to find it again. There it is. So now is the time to get involved. So please reach out to the science working groups, Michael, Avery, any of the other working group members and leads that you will see. This meeting is pivotal. I know we say that for every meeting, but this time we mean it. The science and technical working groups are engaging now to set priorities. The architecture for the design and the instrument is at a formative stage. Ideas are still driving the design, but costs are being refined and they are providing new considerations. So as Avery said, we are going to have to make some decisions about what we can afford and what we want to go to the mat for. We are targeting late 2023 for solidifying our final design and proposals for construction, which seems like it's also far away, but at the same time, not so far away. And that would allow us to reach completion by 2030. As you participate in this meeting, I would ask that you keep a couple of things in mind. The first is that the ngEHT needs to be science-driven. Institutional considerations come later. Let us now think about what the best science will be. It must be transformative. And I would also urge everyone to consider that the ngEHT is not a first light instrument, and we can consider a phased approach. Which 5 sites around the globe are the most important? where would we put the dishes first to make the first big leap, possibly with the other 5 telescopes coming later? This is an idea that we may want to consider given the realities of funding or political considerations. And I'll just leave by saying your participation is crucial and look forward to the whole meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Shep. It's an inspiring vision, and you know, some of us have certainly voted with our feet. It's just a tremendous opportunity. I really like the toe below the horizon line. You know, it's absolutely beautiful. Garrett, did you want to take over the screen and tell us about the design challenges and process?
Sure. Are you able to see my screen okay?
I am.
All right. Well, thank you. And hello, I'm Garrett Fitzpatrick. I'm the project engineer for ngEHT. I have the wonderful opportunity to follow this inspiring vision and tell you a little bit of the story of how we plan to make this work. We've got so much exciting and inspiring science. Later today, immediately following this, we're going to hear updates from the science working groups. You hear about all these exciting questions that we want to deliver. And we're going to start to make this transition into thinking of constraints and requirements and some things that'll help us make this array become a reality. So I'll tell you a little bit about that and where our steps in the project and what we plan to do this week. All right, so what I plan to cover how the pieces fit together. Where are we logically in the project? Where are we in time? What governs some of these constraints that we need to be considering as we start to introduce the requirements? What is the system? What are we actually planning to build? And how do we envision that operating? We'll also talk about what's still on the table on the concept side. And then maybe a little bit more of what the focus of this week is going to be on are these key performance metrics. And we want to start talking about what's most important. How do we make priority decisions? We need to start figuring out how are the ways that we're assessing various array configurations, and how do we tie that to the science? Before I jump into this, we have a number of people that have been instrumental that have made up the larger engineering and the systems team for ngEHT. Jonathan Weintraub, who you'll hear from on Wednesday, was the acting project engineer before me, did a lot of the pivotal early work. Alex Raymond, you'll hear more from tomorrow, has led a lot of our site characterization and optimization work. And then Mark, Aaron, and Ryan will be leading various subgroups in the exercise I'll talk about in a minute. And then we have Janice Houston will be joining us in January. All right, so project roadmap, where are we? We are on the macro scale, we are here with this launch of science working groups, the launch of the initial technical working groups, and this somewhat chaotic logic of fitting how do we marry the ambitious science goals with the architecture to deliver it. So to be a little bit more specific, we're here. We're trying to finalize and get to an alignment on key science goals. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about this week is around those, the science goals, and then what we're going to use coming out of those science goals is requirements and trying to both do this on the science and on the system side so that we can start to make that really detailed traceability down to what the instrument needs to deliver. Beyond that, in time, we kicked off this grant as part of an NSF mid-scale research infrastructure grant back in 2019. We're just about 2 years into this project. The next major milestone after this November meeting is a system requirements review, where we hope to have the science goals traced to those technical requirements. We will have gone through a number of the major architecture trade studies, and then started to formulate a more detailed partnership strategy to make these sites a reality. Coming out of that and looking ahead, we're currently planning to organize the proposal for an implementation plan, with the first opportunity, the pre-proposal for the next NSF mid-scale award in February of 2023. We're gearing up for being ready for an implementation plan, the beginning stages of that in 2023. And that coincides with passing a conceptual design review for the array and a new station design. Beyond that, just another milestone to point out, we are gearing up for deployment of the ngEHT backend systems to the Owens Valley Radio Observatory and also the Large Millimeter Telescope in Mexico. We'll be completing the array and station preliminary design review, going through a lot of the system integration activities and getting ready for a first fringe test in early 2024. All right, as far as programmatic constraints, cost targets, if you join the February meeting, we started to talk a little bit about cost. We're targeting a construction cost of around $180 million with operations at 13 a year. We have a cost model that informs a lot of the initial architecture understanding and the various options we're considering. It looks at capital and operating costs. Looks at array configurations, the operating modes, the amount of data, the data handling strategies, and we're able to compare kind of side by side some of the different cost options for the array. Of course, we can't make too much progress on this without the science goals, and that's one of the things that we are hoping to get out of this conference is a little bit better understanding of science goals and priorities. And we will introduce some of the cost element as well as we start to understand some of the trade-offs. Shep mentioned schedule. We're targeting to have the system design complete in 2024 and the full ngEHT array ready for operations by the end of this decade. As far as other constraints go, we have some that are driven by the mid-scale research infrastructure program and the various design review and requirements that come with that. We are hoping for a 50-50 international funding split between US and non-US sources. This array absolutely requires very strong international collaboration. It will not work without strong international collaboration. So that is an emphasis that we need to be thinking about throughout the design process. And then we plan to operate a little bit more like an experiment than a facility, and we can talk a little bit more about that later in the week. As far as what we're building, a product breakdown structure, we think about the array in terms of stations, data management subsystems, and the array monitoring and control. Shep mentioned the technical working groups. They don't cover all of the subsystems. We have a mix of subawards and various in-work activities that are doing some of the lower level design, but these were identified as the major drivers of the architecture that we really need to start getting design considerations, understand interfaces, and to start making the partnerships that will make these systems become a reality. I'll touch briefly on operating modes. I think most are probably aware of how the EHT operates today. in mostly this single epoch kind of campaign mode. It's a 2-week session yearly in the March-April timeframe. We want to build on that and continue that as an operating mode. There's a lot of work underway with the existing EHT to introduce agile operations. We want to build on that as well and start to think about long-term monitoring. How do we deliver more multi-month observations with subarrays of the ngEHT? We also, Shep mentioned target of opportunity, being able to respond quickly to an observed event by another facility. And then also thinking ahead for coordinated multi-facility, can we introduce other either ground or space instruments to consider some of those science goals as well. And then beyond EHT science is really single dish mode. What else can we do with these single dishes that might also drive some of the architecture and design requirements? I'll briefly touch on this trade space model and some of the decisions that are on the table. When we think about architecture, there are a number of performance requirements that we have a good idea about that are likely to be firm requirements for the array as a whole. We know it's going to be a bandwidth expansion, roughly 4 times what we can do today. Dual band observing, the simultaneous observation. We're going to be dealing with a lot more data, hundreds of petabytes, depending on the duration and frequency of our operations. And then processing, we're going to be dealing with quite a bit higher computational load. Drivers for costs include the location, where are the sites, the dish size, operating mode, how much data we're talking about, how fast the data needs to be delivered. And then the overall autonomy of control. These are dishes in remote locations. They're small dishes and need to be fairly or fully autonomous and remotely operated. I thought for architecture, it would help to frame this week by stating a few questions that we can keep in mind as we go through the week. One is new sites. How many do we need? We don't, not that we need this input from everyone in the conference, but we want to give you a sense of some of the questions that we have in mind that we're grappling with. So, number of sites, where do they need to be, not only to meet science requirements, but also to deliver operational and reliability performance. Observation time is a major piece of this. How much is needed really between the existing EHT sites and the new sites to deliver this increase in duration of observations? How do we handle data transportation and storage to deliver optimal speed and cost? There's a big trade-off to be made about data transportation, storage, and handling. Dish size is another a big piece of it and a driver of cost for construction. 86 gigahertz, Shep mentioned, that's a major piece of the trade study. Will we include 86? Another piece of that is simultaneous observation at 86 and the feasibility that comes with that technical challenge. And then finally, another question to consider is the scale. We're talking about potentially 10 new sites that need to interact and interface with existing sites that have legacy hardware with new hardware. How do we scale the design and development to consider operational needs throughout the life of the array? All right, so I mentioned we talked a little bit about key performance metrics. I won't go into too much detail here. Later on in the week, we will get into exercises that start to understand a little bit more about these metrics and what they mean for our science goals. Baseline and point source sensitivity are major metrics that we're considering. Angular resolution and field of view, similar to how you might have considered for the EHT. Image dynamic range, and then bringing in the snapshot dynamic range as we start thinking of the various science that we want to do in a single scan. And then, of course, the polarization fidelity, both linear and circular, are important aspects as well. All right, I'll spend a minute talking about this exercise, this metrics and architecture Lego blocks exercise is intended to start getting the conversation about what's most important. So we've sent out a survey to the science working group leads about those metrics that I just talked about, and we'll have that as a starting point for this session. We've got immediately following this presentations from the science working group leads about the key science goals and where those groups are currently. And then we have 3 sessions. The first 2 are small group discussions where we'll review the survey results and start talking about what's most important and trying to get at what is the minimum acceptable performance levels. And then session 2, in between session 1 and 2, we have a core team that's going to be pre-populating a few array configurations. So when you come into session 2 on Thursday, we'll have a few different array configurations to think about, and we'll look at that and build off of the metrics conversation. And then as we go into Friday's presentations, where the groups will come back as a plenary and we'll talk as a large group about what we talked about in those small groups. This is the beginning of a conversation. We really only have 2 hours in small groups. We won't get all that far, but we will have some crucial conversations, and we're going to build on that going forward after the meeting. Okay, so some logistics. One is to sign up for that session. You can do that on Slack. The way I did it, I went to Slack, I went to the channels and these 3 dots here. If you click on that and you click on browse channels and you start typing in Lego, you will see the 6 different subgroups. These are based on the science working groups, the 6 science driven working groups that we have. If you're a member of those, you can join directly. If you are not a member of those, you can still join. Please join whatever group that you are most interested in. No need to have specialized experience in those groups. We welcome all contributions. And then going forward after that, one other point to mention is the ngEHT Explorer app developed by Avery Broderick, which allows some interactive understanding of some of the performance of different arrays and different array performance levels. So you can go, this is open and available right now. We won't make a certain session on it this week, but you can use it throughout the week to start getting a better feel for different architecture decisions. And there'll be more info on this on Slack. And then finally, to close up the next 3 to 6 months as we look ahead for this architecture effort, we're going to be going through this major trait studies, making some key architecture decisions. We want to be converging on science goals and priorities, de-risking some of the technical design risks, and really building the international community across multiple levels. All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Garrett. It's applaud on behalf of everybody. We are a little bit past time for this session. There's just too much exciting science and design to be done, and I take full responsibility for that. But let me full responsibility for going overtime. No responsibility for the exciting science and design. I invite maybe one question and would direct additional questions. I see that there's quite a few comments in the chat to the Slack discussion. So is there one question that somebody wants to voice? Please raise your hand if so. Okay, Marshall, go ahead.
So I was just wondering, is there a formal representation from the ngVLA here?
There is a talk by Eric Murphy on Thursday, and Rob Salino is of course the project scientist for the ngVLA, and he served on the SOC. So I'm not sure if that's formal, but we certainly are interested and happy to hear from them. Shep, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say in response to Marshall's point that we're in discussions with the ngVLA now about possible synergies where 86 gigahertz receivers on ngEHT dishes could work in concert with the ngVLA to to greatly enhance the north-south resolution. So that'd be really useful. And that's what Sarah Isaoun, Frigg, and Dom Pesce are looking at right now.
That's the sort of thing I was thinking about. There certainly will be synergies.
Yeah, it's very important because it speaks to what the ngEHT could do when it's not peering at black hole shadows. I mean, there are other months of the year when a lower frequency capability could be very, very useful.
And Michael reminds us in the chat that Tony Beasley is on the ngEHT Project Advisory Committee. So many ties. Okay, so with that, thank you, Marshall, and thank you, Shep and Garrett. Let me applaud both of you again. Thank you for getting us off, getting us started right. We will be back in I believe 10 minutes to begin hearing about ngEHT Science Working Group priorities and what excites them most. So thank you all, and I will see you all in 10 minutes.